The Battle of Gaugamela, also called the Battle of Arbela, was the decisive battle of Alexander the Great's invasion of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. In 331 BC, Alexander's army of the Hellenic League met the Persian army of Darius III near Gaugamela, close to the modern city of Erbil. Even though heavily outnumbered, Alexander emerged victorious due to his superior tactics and army. It was a decisive victory for the Hellenic League and led to the fall of the Achaemenid Empire. Background: in November 333 BC, Darius III had lost the Battle of Issus, resulting in the capture of his wife, his mother, and his two daughters, Statera II and Drypetes. Darius had retreated to Babylon, where he regrouped the remaining army from the previous battle. The victory at Issus had given Alexander control of southern Asia Minor. Following a victory at the Siege of Tyre which lasted from January to July, Alexander controlled the Levant. After his victory at Gaza, Persian troop counts were low and the Persian satrap of Egypt, Mazaces, peacefully surrendered to Alexander. Negotiations between Darius and Alexander. Darius tried to dissuade Alexander from further attacks on his empire by diplomacy. Ancient historians provide different accounts of his negotiations with Alexander, which can be separated in three negotiation attempts. Justin, Arrian and Curtius Rufus write that Darius sent a letter to Alexander after the Battle of Issus. The letter demanded that he withdraw from Asia and release his prisoners. According to Curtius and Justin, he offered a ransom for his prisoners, but Arrian does not mention a ransom. Curtius describes the tone of the letter as offensive. Alexander refused his demands. A second negotiation attempt took place after the capture of Tyre. Darius offered Alexander a marriage with his daughter Statera II and all the territory west of the Halys River. Justin is less specific, not mentioning a specific daughter and speaking of a portion of Darius, a kingdom. Diodorus Siculus likewise mentions the offer of all territory west of the Halys River, a treaty of friendship and a large ransom for the captives. Diodorus is the only ancient historian who mentions that Alexander concealed this letter and presented his friends with a forged letter favorable to his own interests. Again, Alexander refused. Darius started to prepare for another battle after the failure of the second negotiation attempt. Even so, he made a third and final effort to negotiate after Alexander's departure from Egypt. Darius' third offer was much more generous. He praised Alexander for the treatment of his mother Sisigambis and offered him all territory west of the Euphrates, co-rulership of the Achaemenid Empire, the hand of one of his daughters and 30,000 talents of silver. In the account of Diodorus, Alexander deliberated this offer with his friends. Parmenion was the only one who spoke up, saying, "If I were Alexander, I should accept what was offered and make a treaty." Alexander reportedly replied, "So should I, if I were Parmenion." Alexander again refused the offer of Darius, insisting that there could be only one king of Asia. He called on Darius to surrender to him or to meet him in battle to decide who was to be the sole king of Asia. The descriptions given by the other historians of the third negotiation attempt are similar to the account of Diodorus, but differ in details. Diodorus, Curtius and Arrian write that an embassy was sent instead of a letter, which is claimed by Justin and Plutarch. Plutarch and Arrian mention the ransom offered for the prisoners was 10,000 talents, but Diodorus, Curtius and Justin give a figure of 30,000. Arrian writes that this third attempt took place during the Siege of Tyre, where the other historians place the second negotiation attempt. With the failure of diplomacy, Darius decided to prepare for another battle with Alexander. Prelude. After settling affairs in Egypt, Alexander returned to Tyre during the spring of 331 BC. He reached Thapsacus in July or August of 331 BC. Arrian relates that Darius had ordered Mazius to guard the crossing of the Euphrates near Thapsacus with a force of 3,000 cavalry. He fled when Alexander's army approached to cross the river. Alexander's march through Mesopotamia. After crossing the Euphrates, Alexander followed a northern route instead of a direct southeastern route to Babylon. While doing so, he had the Euphrates and the mountains of Armenia on his left. The northern route made it easier to forage for supplies and did not feature the extreme heat of the direct route. When some Persian scouts were captured, they reported to the Macedonians that Darius had encamped past the Tigris River and wanted to prevent Alexander from crossing. Alexander found the Tigris undefended and succeeded in crossing it with great difficulty. In contrast, Dariuss mentions that Mazius was only supposed to prevent Alexander from crossing the Tigris. Mazius would not have bothered to defend it because he considered it uncrossable due to the strong current and depth of the river. Furthermore, Dariuss and Curtius Rufus mention that Mazius employed scorched earth tactics in the countryside Alexander's army had to pass. After the Macedonian army had crossed the Tigris, a lunar eclipse occurred. Following the calculations, the date must have been October 1 in 331 BC. Alexander then marched southwards along the eastern bank of the Tigris. On the fourth day after the crossing of the Tigris, his scouts reported that Persian cavalry had been spotted, numbering no more than 1,000 men. When Alexander attacked them with his cavalry force ahead of the rest of his army, the Persian cavalry fled. Most of them escaped, but a few were slain or taken prisoner. The prisoners told the Macedonians that Darius was not far away, with his encampment near Gaugamela. Strategic analysis. Several researchers have criticized the Persians for their failure in harassing Alexander's army and disrupting its long supply lines when it advanced through Mesopotamia. Peter Green thinks that Alexander's choice for the northern route caught the Persians off guard. Darius would have expected Alexander to take the faster, southern route directly to Babylon, just as Cyrus the Younger had done in 401 BC before his defeat in the Battle of Cunaxa. The use of the scorched earth tactic and scythed chariots by Darius suggests that he wanted to repeat that battle. Alexander would have been unable adequately to supply his army if he had taken the southern route, even if the scorched earth tactic would fail. The Macedonian army, underfed and exhausted from the heat, would then be defeated at the plain of Cunaxa by Darius. When Alexander took the northern route, Mazius must have returned to Babylon to bring the news. Darius most likely decided to prevent Alexander from crossing the Tigris. This plan failed because Alexander probably took a river crossing that was closer to Thapsacus than Babylon. Darius would have improvised and chosen Gaugamela as his most favorable site for a battle. Jonah Lendring argues the opposite and commends Mazius and Darius for their strategy. Darius would have deliberately allowed Alexander to cross the rivers unopposed in order to guide him to the battlefield of his own choice. Location. Darius chose a flat open plain where he could deploy his larger forces, not wanting to be caught in a narrow battlefield as he had been at Issus 2 years earlier, where he could not deploy his huge army properly. Darius had his soldiers flatten the terrain before the battle, to give his 200 war chariots the best conditions. However, this did not matter. On the ground were few hills and no bodies of water that Alexander could use for protection, and in the autumn the weather was dry and mild. The most commonly accepted opinion about the location is east of Mosul in modern-day northern Iraq, suggested by Sir Aurel Stein in 1938. Size of Persian army. Modern estimates. Some ancient Greek historians suggest that the main Persian army numbered between 200,000 and 300,000, but some modern scholars suggest that it was no larger than 50,000 because of the logistical difficulty of fielding more than 50,000 soldiers in battle at the time. However, it is possible that the Persian army could have numbered over 100,000 men. One estimate is that there were 25,000 peltasts, 10,000 immortals, 2,000 Greek hoplites, 1,000 Bactrians, and 40,000 cavalry, 200 scythed chariots, and 15 war elephants. Hans Delbrück estimates Persian cavalry at 12,000 because of management issues, Persian infantry less than that of the Greek heavy infantry, and Greek mercenaries at 8,000. Worry estimates a total size of 91,000, Wellman 90,000, Delbrück 52,000, Engels and Green no larger than 100,000. Ancient sources. According to Arrian, Dariuss's force numbered 40,000 cavalry and 1 million infantry. Diodorus Siculus put it at 200,000 cavalry and 800,000 infantry. Plutarch put it at 1 million troops, while according to Curtius Rufus it consisted of 45,000 cavalry and 200,000 infantry. Furthermore, according to Arrian, Diodorus, and Curtius, Darius had 200 chariots while Arrian mentions 15 war elephants. Included in Darius's infantry were about 2,000 Greek mercenary hoplites. While Darius had a significant advantage in numbers, most of his troops were of a lower quality than Alexander's. Alexander's Pejetawa were armed with a 6-meter pike, the sarissa. The main Persian infantry was poorly trained and equipped in comparison to Alexander's Pejetawa and hoplites. The only respectable infantry Darius had were his 2,000 Greek hoplites and his personal bodyguard, the 10,000 Persian immortals. The Greek mercenaries fought in a phalanx, armed with a heavy shield but with spears no longer than 3 meters, while the spears of the immortals were 2 meters long. Among the other Persian troops, the most heavily armed were the Armenians, who were armed the Greek way, and probably fought as a phalanx. The rest of Darius's contingents were much more lightly armed. The main weapon of the Achaemenid army historically was the bow and arrow, and javelin. Size of Macedonian army. Modern estimates. Alexander commanded Greek forces from his kingdom of Macedon and the Corinthian League along with Thracian allies. According to Arrian, the most reliable historian of Alexander, his forces numbered 7,000 cavalry and 40,000 infantry. Most historians agree that the Macedonian army consisted of 31,000 heavy infantry, including the mercenary and hoplite from other allied Greek states in reserve, with an additional 9,000 light infantry consisting mainly of peltasts with some archers. The size of the Greek mounted army was about 7,000.